I state your name.
I, Anthony Tarrafone,
Of the Village of Irvington, County of Westchester, State of New York.
of the Village of Irvington, County of Westchester, State of New York,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New York.
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
And that I will faithfully discharge
I will faithfully discharge
the duties of the office of Fire Chief
the duties of the office of Fire Chief
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my abilities.
Congratulations.
You can take it, Abby. Thanks, Abby.
Want to move the microphone?
Being you.
You got it, Sam?
No.
That's a big group.
You want us to move together?
There's a lot of character in uniform.
Wait, you're gonna turn. Tell us when you got it, we'll keep going back.
Great. Okay, I'm missing.
Everybody hold their breath, just squeeze. Everybody sound good?
Okay.
Good?
Thank you guys as well.
You ready? Let's do it.
Thank you, thank you.
Just a few minutes, you work. Exactly. I feel like I'm always, you never learn very well, right?
So we'll move on to announcements. The first is that I'm happy to announce that we have Healthy Teen Brain Week coming up, which is next week. I guess it's actually the day. It's Wednesday, April 20th. We also have Building Safety Month. That's the month I was looking for. That's the month of May. So very happy to have Building Safety Month. We also have Arbor Day, which is coming up, April 29th. And we had a check over $25,000, which was a combination of many projects performed by Tom Bucci, but they added up to $134,405, and that came out of the operating budget, the capital budget, and it was for both water department and DPW projects. I also wanted to announce a public hearing for May 2nd to amend the insurance requirements for sidewalk cafes and sidewalk vending. My 2 seconds on that is it looks like maybe we asked for a little bit too much insurance for our sidewalk vending and sidewalk cafes. So we're going to match our neighbors and lower our insurance requirements. So I'll ask for a motion to have a public hearing on May 2nd to discuss that.
So move.
Second? All in favor? Next is correspondence. We have correspondence. The only one, I guess, it came to all of us. We actually had two from Anthony Serenini. See if I can summarize these. He was upset that we were looking at phasing in. We asked the Greenberg town to phase in the reassessment over 5 years, and the entire board supported it. He did not support our support of that. He talks about how he's been overtaxed. He included a letter that he sent to Paul Feiner among those, sharing those sentiments as well. Then he also sent a letter responding to the meeting we had with Paul and Edie McCarthy to discuss the reassessment, which he thanked me for hosting, which was nice. He then also said now is the time that we can look to make cuts in the village and in the school, including folding the police department into the county police department, increase rec fees, suspend overtime work on weekends unless it's an emergency, feasibility study, see if we can fold our library into the high school library, suspend the fireworks display, which one thing I'd like to point out on that is that we haven't paid for it at least since 2009, so we'll be happy about that. He also wanted the school board to look at a Rivertown superintendent. He wanted to look at closing the Main Street School, which I know they did feasibility study about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago now. And then I guess that's really it. So he was disappointed in us. And that was it for correspondence. So I will open it up for public comment. Anybody has any at this point? Chris?
Hi there. Kristen Wall, 58 West Clinton Avenue. I just wanted to ask the board, hi guys, if you would please take a look at, I think you're planning to, but I just wanted to remind you of the urgency of it because the season has started on solar panels. I know that some of our residents have been denied solar panel applications because their houses face south or southeastern. Yeah, that might be your front roof, but that's where your house faces, and I don't think you should be denied the opportunity. Not I don't. Nobody does. I think you should be denied the opportunity to have solar panels and save a little money and contribute to trying to slow global warming. So I hope that you guys can have that conversation soon because this is the time of year that people get on the schedule of the installers. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we are planning on talking about that. Any other public comment at this point? If not, I will move along to the consent agenda. Anyone have any questions or comments on these items?
No, just as always, all the rec stuff is in the budget, right? I mean, that's what it seemed to indicate.
So I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda. Second. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
And now on to the discussion of Brightview Senior Living Projects. How we got here, after we started the process, I guess we kind of hit a bump in the road where we said the project was too big. Brightview came back and said, with the new plan, we looked at that. I think the sense was needed some more tweaks, and now they're back here. We're not looking at all the issues tonight. We're not looking to discuss all the issues tonight. IVAC, stormwater, traffic, all those other issues that have been discussed and would have to be addressed in the FEIS, as well as during site plan. We're not there yet. We're seeing if this board can say, yes, we can live with the building this size or not. That's how I'd phrase it. Mary Ann, if you have anything to add. So I guess Friday we got a new proposal, and that's what we're here to talk about tonight. I think, right? All right.
Can we give them a chance to
Set up.
get set up, I guess?
You know what, Diego? Go ahead. That's fine. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the Board of Trustees, David Steinmetz from the law firm of Zarin & Steinmetz here this evening once again, representing Brightview Senior Living. Good to be back. Just so everybody's clear, with me this evening, David Carliner and Andrew Teeters from Brightview, Eric Anderson and Bonita Cook, our project architects, and Jim Ryan and Diego Villarreal from JMC, project engineers and planners. Before we go, Mr. Mayor, through some of the latest tweaks in the redesign, we feel like we're at a very important crossroad, some would say a dispositive, critical crossroad with regard to the project. And I'm very appreciative of the fact that you all have put in as much time, attention to detail and analysis. And as a result of that, I want to take a step back to begin tonight, because I think it's important. 20 months ago, believe it or not, 20 months ago, the summer of 2014, I came in with Brightview to the village of Irvington and came in very excited. My client had found what we thought was an ideal piece of property in what my client soon learned was an ideal and wonderful village here in Westchester County. We knew that the property could not be developed with an assisted living facility without some form of a rezoning. And we spent a lot of time and energy, and there's a lot of very thoughtful, skilled people at Brightview, and I will commend our team as well, a lot of skilled people on our team, who decided we needed to think this through before we set out to embark on this path. And I came in with my client. I had an informal meeting with village professional staff in August of 2014. We met with all of you in September of 2014 to review a concept. Gentle nod from the village in October of 2014 to pursue an application. No commitment from anyone. But you'll remember me saying, I think you hopefully will remember me saying, we do not want to do this just because it's fun coming to Irvington many nights throughout the year. We want to do this if this is a project that has some traction and some legs and some appeal. And the good news is throughout this process, I think we've all uniformly gotten the sense that assisted living as a concept, providing for seniors, sounds like a good concept here in Irvington as well. No one has ever said to us, we hate the concept of assisted or independent living. And I think I've been to a meeting or two where you've actually said, in fact, we think very highly even of Brightview. So the question then becomes, we're struggling with a site, some zoning text, and some issues. We submitted a zoning petition in December of 2014. You declared yourself lead agent. 15. We did some site visits with your board in the summer of 2015, and we did a site visit with your board just recently again. We went through a public scoping process. You issued a positive declaration. We prepared a DEIS that was subject to hearing dates in December of 15 and January of 16. And there was a cathartic meeting that occurred at, I think it was March 7th of 2016, as the mayor kind of indicated. It was a very important meeting where some of you indicated some comfort with where we were without final commitment. Others indicated some real strong reservations. And we appreciate the time that Trustee Gilliland put in. Everybody knows Mark agreed to some discussions about some technical issues, and March 30th there was a meeting with Mark that I think began to discuss some technical important information that we've begun to explore further. The interesting thing is, I really wish that after that meeting with Mark on March 30th, I could have taken every one of you, put you in my car, and driven you 3.5 miles away to the town of Greenburgh. Because on March 30th of this year, I went to a grand opening of Brightview Tarrytown. It was meaningful to me as a land use professional because I spend way too many nights getting projects approved. There aren't grand openings for subdivisions. There rarely are grand openings for commercial projects. But being able to attend something that actually was open, running, had people living in it, and was incredibly well attended. There were speeches by folks who were already living in Brightview Tarrytown, moving speeches of seniors. There were speeches of individuals our age whose parents were now in that facility, and they were actually thanking those folks who worked there and the assembled politicians, public officials who were there. And for me, and for Jim, and for Diego, and for Cooper, and for Eric, and Benita, we spent a lot of nights in the town of Greenburgh, Mr. Mayor, a lot of nights where I did not have, at the beginning of that project, resounding support. We had bumps along the way. The town of Greenburgh, like the village of Irvington, needed to re-examine its zoning. They struggled with issues. They persevered. And to me, the most pleasing part of March 30th was when 3 members of the town board in Greenburgh pulled me aside and they said, first of all, we're glad we're here. Second of all, we're glad you and your team hung in there, because look around. Look at what your client has built. Look at what you've introduced into our community. It was, for me, a moving experience and a legitimate, real one. And all I can say to you folks is, you have an incredible opportunity in front of you. You have a first-rate senior living provider. You have a first-rate development team that has bent over backwards to try to accommodate issues. You have an 8-acre piece of property that's yielding $150,000, and I think as a result of the Greenburgh reval, now cut down to $110,000 in commercial rateables. You have a wonderful opportunity to provide for your seniors, to provide tax rateables, to provide a gentle, quiet use, and you have a client, you have a provider who's been willing to work with you on design. So I'm asking you all, each of you, to listen to tonight's presentation and help us make the turn at the crossroad. That's the critical turn at the crossroad, because we want to get there, Mr. Mayor. We really think we can. We think we can make the Village of Irvington proud. I'd like nothing more than to be standing next to you at the Brightview Irvington grand opening, because I'm convinced that this site can and will be an amazing introduction into the Village of Irvington, an amazing resource for the community. So bear with us. We're going to try to be brief and to the point on the design changes, and then we have some other comments at the end. We're here to answer your questions, and I can't stress enough that David and Andrew are here because they remain committed to this project, provided the village still wants us to be here. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the board. Again, for the record, my name is Jim Ryan. I'm the principal, owner, managing member of JMC. And as David had indicated, we put a lot of effort into this. And I think in this last iteration, and I thank the board for the opportunity to try to further develop this. And I think with the input actually from your board and certain members of your board too, we made some changes which I think even we feel are strong and positive changes for the overall plan. And I'm going to take you through those briefly. I'll let my associate Diego talk about a few things, but he'll point out some of the changes that we made, I think the important changes. And Eric Anderson will take you through some of the architectural details. So we have both elevational views and site plans to talk about tonight. I think most importantly, I think it all starts with the positioning of the building. And I think that at the original, we were looking at maintaining a 300-foot distance off of North Broadway, and that was almost a critical element. And, you know, as the plan started developing, you know, we were shifting that building around. And I think what dawned on us is we started looking at with the smaller building, and this is a significantly smaller building than we started with, that we actually could make some changes and shift that building back. So what starts as a key element of the design is the distance here. We are now, from the original distance, we are about 337 feet. We were 290 feet. So we pushed the building back almost 50 feet. Now, it's not just the positioning of the building, because you know that this site grades up steadily. What we actually found is that there were some net benefits to making that change in the building, and it helped us from a grading standpoint. So, you know, with the design, with the open building on this side of the building here, we actually found that the grades coming around the building, when we were able to stretch out this road, allowed us easier access to the courtyard. So we made some fundamental changes in that courtyard. But we also made a major change in terms of the shift of the parking. If you recall, we had entrance to the garage was under the far side of the building. What we found is that the grading allowed us actually access to the building for here. So that was a significant change, and it did a couple of things for us too. When you match up the grade, we found that the grade across the building here is starting to match up with the existing grade. So by establishing the grade of the parking lot here and looking how it affected this area right here, we actually, there's a whole area which I think has some important existing landscape. In fact, there's a 34-inch oak tree, which as a landscape architect, I thought that's really key. It's key for a number of reasons. It's key to kind of break up the visual here, but it's also a prominent feature of the site. And we were able to really limit the grading in this area. And then what also happened too is that when we started looking at the grade as you approach really the natural grades of the site along this side, we were re-looking at what we'll call the utilitary and the utility area of the building. So it's the loading, some of the other back of house things that were going on. And what we found is that we were actually able to match up the lowest grade of the garage to the lowest grade of the maintenance area, the loading area. That's important because what it allowed us to do is to tuck that into the building. We had a much larger area for maintenance overall, and we were able to reduce that area. That helped us in preserving the landscape here, and it also allowed us to create a fairly flat area here for garden area. So what happened here affected as you continue on up. So the grading again, allowed us to proceed with another major change here. If you recall, we were stressing to come around the backside of the building. We were creeping up that hill. So it became an element that if we could establish a driveway here, not so much a roadway, but a driveway, we can actually serve the site better in this area here. We can also create a much better situation between the existing stone buildings and the facility for Brightview here. So this area here, we have a narrow driveway here, allowed us for parking. So that parking becomes easier for the affordable units. So you have the upper building here and the lower building here. And believe it or not, the grade change from here to the lower area and across is only about 6 feet. So although you see some walls in here, we were just looking at a stepped wall, 3 foot, and another 3 foot wall, allowed us to do some enhancements. Almost, it's a barrier of sorts, but it's a minimal. We can plant that area out. And more importantly, we didn't want to lose connectivity between this building here and what's happening in the sidewalks here too. So in doing that, we're able to actually bring a sidewalk down in front of this building and connect to the sidewalk system, which eventually come out to Broadway, which I think is an important change too. In getting the parking up here, we were able to get 6 parking spaces. We've also accommodated this area in terms of the dimensions to allow for a fire vehicle to get up into this area here. We have a backup area here. And this obviously still we need to go through this with the fire authorities for that, but it changed kind of our whole thinking of this area here. So now we have a garden area in the back, which is a very important element of the Brightview design, and we have another garden here, and now we have connectivity through this whole facility into an interior walkway system. And since I'm up at this point too, I'll also point out too that we wanted to, it was suggested to us by one of your board members, that we look at, if you recall, some of you had an opportunity to walk into that upper area, and we looked at that and from a grading standpoint, getting to this upper stone building, and maybe there's a possibility of creating some kind of a trail system through that area, because it does flatten out as you get into this area here. And there's some opportunity with an easement that runs alongside the property to possibly make a connection so that there's increased interest in this site in the back here. Take advantage of just the height of that area and some of the walking trails that might be up in that area. So that was another positive that we were able to take out of this. Again, Eric will talk about the details of the building, but I think some of the important features here that Eric will really get into is that this front of the building is now down a story. So originally we were at 4 stories on this portion of the building here, and this area here, although this will be appearing as 4 stories from some of the areas in the courtyard and the like, it's actually a 3-story reveal in the back portion of the building. And Eric will show you that the visibility of that, because that's now almost 450 feet back from Broadway here, that given the angle that you're looking at and the generous vegetation that we're looking at establishing throughout this portion of the site, you're not really going to see that back portion. So for all intents and purposes, this is going to be actually lower than the absolute elevation of the existing building. So it's some 6 or 7 feet below what you're seeing out there for the height of the existing building. So it'll actually drop everything down, and you'll see that in the perspectives too. So just to summarize some of the technical things, we have 24 parking spaces that are still underground. I think those are important spaces. 56 surface parking spaces. Again, they're in the same areas. There's existing parking lot areas in here, and there's existing parking in this area of the site too. So, we're able to maintain those areas, and grade-wise, I think, without really much physical changes to the site, to reestablish parking areas in those areas. Again, the smaller driveway linking up and providing parking, I think, for the affordable units, I think was an important, very positive development, because coming around the entire building, for that, while, fire safety and so on is important, we think we can address that in other ways, because the accessibility of the building from a lot of different points too. But again, that's something we'll talk about in much greater detail when we get, and hopefully get a chance to talk to the fire authorities on that. Okay. So again, the important part from a design standpoint is The overall circulation from the pedestrian standpoint, I think is changed in a dramatic way, and I think it's very positive change. Circulation through the site for vehicles, I think, is much improved. Access to the parking, I think, works really well, and I think establishing that lower area or the loading area for this at the lower level of the garage is a much more efficient design. Took away some of the paving that we had there in that area, and I think it's a much improved plan. So I'm going to let Eric take over and talk a little bit about the architecture and what's happened with that. So, thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the board. Just for the record, Eric Anderson, JAL, architect and engineer. As Jim said, the most significant architectural improvement of this plan is that the front of the building is now 3 stories instead of 4. Some we've heard. Yeah. How's that?
Is it on?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Most significant improvement of this design, in my view, is that the building's now 3 stories along the front instead of 4. That was something that we've heard from various board members. Since the inception, there was some concern about the height, how it would relate to the existing building and how it would feel from North Broadway. So, as Jim said, the fact that we've pulled the building farther back from the street, as well as lowered it to 3 stories, brings it much more into much more of a residential scale. As you can see, this is compared to the old DEIS plan. We have the top floor behind a mansard, so essentially reads as a 2.5-story building. We've got some porch elements that we talked about prior meetings, some balconies and a solarium type element to bring it into a residential scale, and also to relate to the fact this is in Irvington and some of the architecture that's familiar to all of you from Irvington. The line, you can see the line right here, that's where the ridge line of the existing building is. As Jim said, we're significantly lower, 6 or 7 feet lower than that. Measured from the ground to the top of this building, basically it's the same as what you have there now. It's 2 3-story buildings. Height-wise, it's the same. How it reads from the street should be similar as well. Although, again, we're incorporating some of the elements of the existing architecture, the beautiful accessory buildings that are on the site. We're trying to bring some of that into this building, and we hope that we can get into more detail on that later. Just bring up another exhibit. So you can see in this site section, North Broadway is down here. You can see some of the existing buildings that you're familiar with. This is the small accessory building up in the back of the site now. From the ground up here, this is the 3-story section that you see. There's a small patio out in front of the building, similar to what's there now. We think that's a really nice element. Wanted to keep that. The parking has been moved from the back section of the building to the front. As we push this building back into the hill, that lower story essentially was starting to get buried. So we went with that, put the parking in the front rather than back here, and what that essentially allows us to do is have less excavation coming out of the site, less blasting, less rock coming out. It's basically a more site-friendly design that steps up the hill rather than working against it. You can see in the back here, there's a 4-story section that Jim alluded to. You essentially see that when you're inside the courtyard. If you're pulling up to the front door of the building, the residents would see that from the courtyard. This is not readily visible from North Broadway because the building in the front is blocking that view. You can see in the back here, this half of that north wall also is 4 stories, and it steps down to 3. And one of the things this allows us to do is put a rooftop deck with some planting, could be a green roof element up on the roof to be, again, more environmentally friendly. You can see in the back, as Jim said, it's a 3-story section in the back of the building, stepping from 4 back up to 3. And one of the things we like about this design is the 4-story sections of the building are now close to 500 feet away from the street, and most of it's not visible from the street anyway. So we're trying to achieve a building that reads as a 3-story section. The other thing that I just want to reiterate what Jim mentioned, this lower garage levels below ground, this is where deliveries are coming. One of the nice things about this scheme is it allows those deliveries to be down low where they can very easily be screened. Just as a reference point, the 4-story section here is essentially, if you're familiar with the existing building, it has a 4-story section, looks kind of like a delivery area on the existing building. This 4-story section is essentially the same place. It's the same distance back from Broadway. And just like the existing building, the grade helps us there as far as screening that. Just quickly wanted to show you what the current plan is we're bringing today versus the plan we showed you last time. That question had come up. This is the sketch we did of the previous plan. Last time we saw you, the 4-story version. This is today's scheme. You can see the width is the same. It's the same width as the building that's there now, with the obvious difference being that the top story has been lowered. That, in a nutshell, are the architectural changes. I'm glad to discuss anything else with you if you have any questions, but that's where we are architecturally.
We're just going to show you some quick overlays of the building, just get a better idea, I think, the comparison of the earlier versions of the building. So this is a plan, just shows where we started. Get these in perspective from the DEIS building. So you can see the outer limits, everything's in kind of a pink red. So we started occupying, again, a lot closer to Broadway, and certainly the width of it took up a lot of the width. It's almost double the size of what the existing building is out there too. So we've shrunk it down significantly. And I think the second plan that we'll show you is a plan that we were here last time. There was some concerns expressed about the mass of the building still because of the visibility of the back section of the building. So essentially what we did is we took that off. And again, that afforded us the opportunity for a potential access to the back portion here. So this portion of the building is completely lopped off and will be hidden substantially either by the trees, the vegetation, or the proposed building in this location here. So it has been stepped back even further here. And the courtyard, we're looking at greening up that courtyard, but you see the building. So the building did come back a little bit further here, but if we're able to work with fire officials on the access back there, we think that we have full access to this building through this area here. We've opened up that courtyard access here to most of that so we can create some gardens. If in fact the fire department insisted on full access, we can do that as well. We can just bring that around here. It'll move this back slightly. I don't think it's a huge burden to do that, but our hope is that we can retain a lot of that vegetation, particularly in that location. So those are the two comparisons. So
Jim,
yeah.
Jim, why don't you talk about the landscaping, or were you going to do that later, the landscaping?
No, I can go into that now. So
that would be helpful.
So the landscaping that we're doing, a couple of suggestions that we had. So when we're looking at the front portion of the landscape, we're looking at going, as you know, it kind of tears its way up. There's a slope and then it flattens out another slope. So we were looking to go to a more naturalized type of landscape to introduce. You have some heavy vegetation with some of the pines that are in this area, but creating more of that look in here. So we'd be bringing in more pines, and this would be more of a meadow type of condition along the front here. The wall that exists and actually stops at a portion, we're looking at being able to continue that wall. So that's going to enhance the look, I think, of the frontage of the property. But we're going to go with the tiered landscape, and plant some of those slopes. And then as it comes up to the plateaus, we're looking at a more naturalized landscaping here. The other important thing is, if you remember, the roadway came right through this area here, the original roadway. And I think what we try to do as landscape architects is make sense of the trees that were planted, because there's some nice trees along that frontage of the property. So what we actually did is we organized some walking paths through here. We're looking at potential for a gazebo or some kind of feature in the front. So this will become part of the overall walking system, which is important to the residents. Again, we do a lot of these paths with senior housing because it's a big part of the therapeutic value that they can get walking around these facilities. And I think, we can do it in such a way too that'll look nice and be established almost as another garden for this too. As you get up into this area here, again, that's the 34-inch oak that we're preserving. We're looking at introducing some backdrop for that because this is still the loading area here. But we're confident with the existing trees and the viewport coming through here that we'll be able to screen that. And then introducing more landscaping as we go around the facility. A big garden area here right in front of this existing stone building, another garden area in here which we'll fully develop. And hopefully we get a chance to get into more detail on that because we pay an awful lot of attention to these interior gardens. If you ever had the chance to go up to the Greenberg facility, you'll see the effort we put into those areas. And then another potential garden here at that upper level too. It's going to be, again, a garden for the residents with small walking trails through there and features. Again, to add to kind of the overall therapeutic value of the landscape here, which is really a critical element of overall design. So
Dave. Just very briefly, my client, as well as a couple of folks in Irvington, have stopped me and asked me whether this is a normal part of the process. We've got a POSDAC, we're doing this full environmental impact statement, and yet we seem to have taken a pause at this juncture, and we're working with the board, with the public, with your consultants, and we didn't move forward with the final environmental impact statement. This is a very normal part of the SEQRA process. SEQRA is designed to tease out issues, require that we take a hard look at them and figure out how to mitigate those impacts. So I must tell you, the fact that we prepared an initial design, prepared a draft environmental impact statement, a rather extensive DEIS, had public hearings, and hit a bump in the road or an important issue or issues that we had to confront. For us as a team, not unusual. We think this was all part of the open and deliberative process that we practice in terms of SEQRA. So we're ready to study the impacts that we now have in a final environmental impact statement. This doesn't necessitate a supplemental environmental impact statement because all we've done is reduced. We reduced the number of units by 34. We reduced the aesthetic impact by shrinking the front of the building and its bulk and its visual impact. We reduced the vehicular impact by making the building smaller. We have fewer number of units, fewer number of staff, fewer number of visitors. We've preserved the front of the site, and as Jim said, and I won't belabor it, a lot of time and attention has now gone into figuring out how to make best use of landscaping to further hide the building. A building that I know Eric and Benita would be the first to tell me probably shouldn't be so hidden because it's going to be extremely attractive.
we could put up the rendering.
That's fine.
Good segue to do that.
That's a great idea. So, we have been asked by your board repeatedly to study the visual impact from Broadway. You all drive Broadway more frequently than I, though I certainly drive it enough to know you do not spend an awful lot of time in that area. You're traveling at 35 to 40 miles an hour. But the fact of the matter is, the building is visible now, and in some respects, the building may be somewhat less visible. The building that's there is visible now. Driving tonight on a beautiful, clear night, I took a good look at that yet again, and that white building is quite visible in the community. This building, in some respects, may actually hide a little bit more between landscaping, colors, etc. Mr. Mayor, we're at a point now where we need some critical feedback from you and the board. We're here. We're all ears. We have a great project, and I'm going to end by telling you what I said at the beginning. I think you have an amazing opportunity in front of you, but it's an opportunity that my client is simply not prepared to move forward with a final environmental impact statement and spend the time the money, the attention, unless we know we have a project that has traction. Where I know, better than most, I can't ask for a binding final commitment under law, but I also know that it's 20 months. And one thing that Brightview has made clear to me, and I think we've said it for you, we want to say it again, Brightview in its history has never spent as much time and as much money in a process and gotten to a point like this and still not known whether it had a viable project with the local governing body. So that's what we're here for. We're here to answer your questions. Some of you have emailed us questions, and we've tried to answer those promptly. Some of you have worked with us and made suggestions. Let us know what else we can do. We really need to hear from you. And Andrew,
I think that's,
I mean, there's no set format, but maybe we'll start with, I think we were kind of, when we left last time, we were kind of divided into, County and Janice supported it, Christina was kind of against it, Mark and I were kind of on the fence, so I guess I leaned against it, Mark was on the fence. Well, maybe do you guys have changed your opinions? Do you have anything you want to say before we kind of move our way down? Or? And I don't want to take you to speak later too, but feel free to start now.
I have been leaning towards the project, as you know, and I again want to say that the things that people have raised as concerns are not necessarily mine. You are a business, you're not a not-for-profit, you've made that clear, that's what it is. So, and I think you've done an amazing amount of work with trying to bring this particular project in line with what our vision is and what we feel would be the best for the village. I think there is a need for senior housing. I don't have any problem with those concerns particularly, except one of the things, and also just let me put this in context, I have only been on the board.
Please?
Sure, I've only been on the board since December, so this 20-month process, I've been in the audience for many of these, but I'm kind of new to this part of it. So one of the questions I have is the viability of this. I'm not the only one who has read in the papers that there are many of these facilities being constructed, not just yours in Greenberg, but several others. The old Frank's Nursery property was recently bought for this. Now, it may just be that this is just the hottest product on the market, and this is the most sensible investment anybody could make, but it's concerning that there's an overbuilding of this type of facility, and that I think we have to deal with your project as it is on paper, but I think we also have to consider the viability. If there's one of the stores on Main Street goes out of business, it's unfortunate for the business person, but you're left with a store that can be easily, changed for another kind of business purpose. If you go down, I'm not so sure where that leaves us. And I think we do have to consider that. That's not the main consideration, but it's certainly a consideration.
Janice, would you like us to speak to that tonight?
Yeah.
We certainly can.
Sure, I'd be happy to respond to you. Hi, I'm David Carlin. I'm one of the partners at Brightview Senior Living. I've been doing this type of work for 35 years. I've never been involved in any community that's ever not been successful and continuing to operate today as a senior living community. This is a lot about operations. It's a lot about the quality of care that you provide. We have an amazing organization. We've worked very hard to build from the ground up the people that work in our buildings, which is what makes the difference at the end of the day. We too we're investing a very significant amount of money in this project, and so we take this issue about market viability very seriously. We have a team of market and financial analysts that look at these projects one by one, very in-depthly, and we have looked at this market, and the truth is that the elderly population is large and growing very quickly. The resources in Westchester County, compared to really the rest of the country, are pretty shocking. There are very few options here, and so you will see more senior living communities being built in Westchester County for the simple reason that there's a very strong need for them. That is what we're experiencing in Terrytown, not so far away from here right now.
Thank you.
Well, to continue on that demographic question, I've thought about that a lot too. In fact, I've thought a lot about all the things that I've heard, and take very seriously all the concerns and all the potential positives, all the possible negatives. But, you know, just to bring it to a personal level, I'm actually the very first baby boomer. I was born in 1947, so I feel like I'm using myself as a possible example for what would be my needs in 20 years. And when I was in high school, the high schools went from the wartime years when there were very few kids to double sessions, rooms, you know, with kids coming out, you know, sitting on the back radiators. So I know about that demographic, and it's a serious concern about what do we do that doesn't create a burden for our kids and allows us to have a lifestyle that we want. And I think the thing that, when you think about the kinds of choices, I think we're a demographic that wants choices. Somebody may want a religious, non-for-profit senior living, and that's fine. They should have that. Some people want to sell their assets and buy into a facility that you own and that has nursing facilities. That's another choice. This is obviously yet another choice for senior living. I don't know if anyone here got advice that, you know, this is the best, this is the worst. I would never have my mother there. I would never want to go there. Yes, I'd love it. No, I wouldn't. But it's a choice. And when I've thought about the meaning of having a facility in a community that you've lived in for a long time, it's not for everybody who's lived here. I don't know that I would, if it happened, that I'd want to be there, but it's a viable option. Is it affordable for everybody? No. Is it affordable for people who sell a home in Irvington and don't have a mortgage and aren't paying taxes anymore and have taken all of that, you know, all those assets and now can parcel it out over 10, 15 years of the rest of their life? Yeah, I think in my financial analysis, that's not something that is for the 0.0%. I think if you take the average house sale in Irvington, think about somebody who's been there for a lot of years and paid off a mortgage, it probably is possible for a fair number of seniors here. And certainly people who want to bring their parents, their aunts, it's not out of the question for many, not all. This is not the answer for everybody, but I started this by saying choices. So one of the reasons that I have not felt terribly negative about the business model, which I understand there are other facilities around. Janice has mentioned them, you've mentioned them. If this is a business, if Brightview is a business that has several states and successful operations, I think that's important. If this were a business that had never run a senior living facility, I'd be a lot more skeptical. I don't think private businesses try to create things that in 10 years will go out of business. No one can see the future. We obviously can't see the future. But, you know, it's like a poker game. What is the risk? What is the reward? So on that issue, I'm sure there are people that recommend other kinds of senior living, that they would never want their parents to be in this place, that they would, no matter what, keep their parents at home. That's fine. That's another choice. It's just not always going to be possible for everybody. The other thing that I said several weeks ago, and I have looked at this from every angle that I can, and that is my concern for the 3 actual historic buildings. I know that there's a lot of talk about historic Broadway, and I feel preserving those 3 stone buildings is critical. And I don't see a way forward with the possible other options for this property that's an assured phenomenon. I don't think that if that Mr. Carafiello, who's here, is going to sell that property, I don't think maybe some other owner would try to preserve them, but we have, again, it's a risk reward. We know now that those 3 buildings with this proposal will be preserved. And to me, that has a lot to do with preserving historic Broadway. that's a very important argument for my values and my sense of what Irvington means. The other thing that from the day I came on this board in 2009, I've talked about affordable housing. We know what's possible here with affordable housing. Not that that Brightview is required to provide this now that they don't have independent living, but they are, we have been totally assured that those 3 stone buildings will have affordable units, the official fair and affordable units that are accepted by the county. That's critical, that's important. I talked a lot about the look of historic estates and the idea of meadows rather than lawns and variety and paths. This is the kind of thing, you go to Lyndhurst, see the way they have paths and interesting things. It's not just lawn. So I think that going in that direction was also an important thing. So I'll let other people talk. I mean, Mark, I so appreciate Mark's absolute amazing amount of time that he put in to think of this as an Irvington resident and thinking about how does this bulk and mass fit in this property. That improved this a lot, and I totally appreciate his time on that. So I did wonder a little bit about the pedestrian path that's on this, the pedestrian connector between, the walking trail has been added to the eastern portion of the property. I still, of course, have many questions. How do people get from the bus stop? How do we keep the staff from getting off a bus stop here and getting to the facility? There are a lot of questions, but our question tonight is not about all those details. It's about the overall issue of, is there enough reason to go forward? Are there enough advantages for the whole community? And I think there are.
Thank you, Connie.
You're welcome.
Gina, do you want to go next?
Sure. So my position pretty much remains unchanged. I do think that the size still at 100,000 square feet is still outlandish for a community like Irvington. I still question whether or not Irvington needs a facility like this, especially considering, as Janice pointed out, the fact that just 6.5 miles to the south and 3.5 miles to our north, there are similar facilities, and there are others in the surrounding area planned. I'm still not sure how this serves our community. I don't really see a lot of, whether it's job creation, stimulus for our downtown businesses, especially since the mix has now changed to no independent and only assisted and memory care. I guess, so I mean, David, in your opening remarks, you almost sounded like Brightview was already planning the grand opening for this, and I take issue with that a little bit because I just feel like we're at a point now where there is rampant overdevelopment going on all around us, and we don't have to accept that. We don't have to accept a project that, no matter how you dress it up, is not consistent with the character of Irvington. And I'm sorry, but I see the valor in trying to serve an elderly population, but this is just too big of a facility, and I just cannot get past the fact that we are talking about North Broadway in Irvington and not 9A and not 119. And I just feel like going forward with a project of this size would be moving in that direction, and I can't support that.
Yeah. My biggest concern was how does this, it plays off a little bit on what Christina's saying, which is how can you put a facility like this on North Broadway and have it not have a significant change to the community. And so, I mean, there's multiple aspects of it, one of which is that I thought was the most critical was, the size, placement, and impact on the visual experience of the Broadway buffer and so forth. I thought this use was actually in a relative range of uses in terms of impacts on traffic and such. The only use I can imagine that would be less than this in terms of traffic would be some residential housing, which actually I believe would have a significant impact on the Broadway buffer. I don't think that stretch of Broadway would ever look like Broadway again. And I think if you had looked at some of the plans presented initially to the planning board, you would see some significant hurdles in that direction that it never seemed to me that that was a viable approach to this property. It was as of right approach with the clustering and subtracting out various restrictions due to steep slopes. So then I thought, well, okay, what can you do to try to make this thing fit in better into the community? And one of the first observations when I started with this, I was a little bit against the building just as being way too big. And then I did some analysis of building sizes in Irvington, and this was actually from the original proposal. Actually, I take that back. Maybe the second proposal, the T-shaped proposal. The O, the T, and the C. Okay, so the T-shaped proposal, and in terms of coverage, square footage, the building was in the top 5 buildings if you include the school complex and stuff like that. So it was up there. But then when you look at it on a map in terms of the area where it's located, it's actually, and you look at the buildings that are in those areas now, it's actually doesn't, it's got an 8-acre site. It doesn't feel that site is, it has some breathing room, I guess I'd say. Behind it, Abbott House. On one side, both sides are commercial properties, and or being used as commercial properties, business rentals. And so I started looking at it from that perspective, and that's where I was. At the last meeting, we'd come up with a list of issues. We'd done the second site walk, and the list of issues included, wow, this thing is too high, too tall. This thing is too close to Broadway. The north facade is too, what was the word? Imposing, uniform and imposing. It was like, and it was too close to those stone buildings to make anything livable. And so that was kind of, when I got together with Brightview, that's essentially my bullet list of hot items. I said, these are the kinds of things you're going to have to address in order for the rest of the board and the community to even begin to accept this as something that could be viable. And that would be, you got to pull it back from Broadway. You've got to reduce the height, at least as it's seen from Broadway. You've got to make sure there's enough space between those stone buildings and on the north side and the building and the main complex itself. I don't know what else I said. More differentiation architecturally, so there wasn't like a 300-foot long wall or whatever it was, a facade wall. So a lot of those kinds of things that would, and then of course pay attention to landscaping. Really important to give a good sense, and I encourage the stuff like the walking trails and making sure there's access all over the site, so there wasn't a lot of areas that are cut off from one another. So it became more usable than it probably is today. So my reaction is that I'm actually pretty favorably surprised by the result of what came back in terms of the building placement. I think pulling the building back and using the underground storage and underground loading dock area, that's smart, that's perfect for this site, that achieves a lot of goals. I think looking at the rendering and seeing you going into a mansard roof reduces the apparent height of this building. The one thing that I don't see is what it would look like, you know, the north frontage would look like. I know we talked about trying to get a rendering of that to see really how large, massive it remains, because it's hard to really tell with the change. So that said, I'm much less concerned now with, can this building exist in that space and be in such a way that it protects the visual quality of Broadway? And I think this building, as the design you've shown, I really do think it's the best you could get. And in some places, pretty surprising that you could get there. Does the building still have a lot of floor space? The answer is yes. Am I concerned about the 4 stories internal? Not really, because you really only see it from inside the courtyard, so I'm not as affected by that. And it's, so the visual impact of that is significantly reduced. Do the arguments about the longevity of the business concern me? Yes, because this is a very specialized use, and I'm not sure what else the building could be put to.
Prison.
And
Right.
so other uses that might be able to be done from it would have a lot of negative impacts potentially, but would have to go through whatever process that would go through. So my own feeling is I would be more than willing to see this go forward through the full FEIS process right now, because there's a lot of other issues that have to be addressed before you guys are really in any kind of a home stretch. I think the scale and scope of the building is, in my mind, is especially considering how it's placed and how it's tucked in and pulled back, I think that it's one of the few things that you could do and not end up with a major change of sense to that space as you drive by and look into it. That's my opinion. But you've got a lot of other issues to own up to. I think you'll still have pressure on the number of units. There may still be some concern about that. There's fire access, the volunteer ambulance corps. There's going to be, and all the other standard FEIS things, stormwater, sewer, blah, blah, blah. One thing I do like about this also is that you actually have significantly reduced the amount of removal of trees and stuff from the plan, from the original plan, which I appreciate. So there's a lot going forward. I still don't know about the social issue. Is this, I don't know that I can decide that for myself. I think that Connie's right, that there has to be a range of changes, of selections. The social issue meaning, is this the kind of environment you want to have your elderly parents, final days in, so to speak, or their days of assisted living? I think there's a lot of concern about that is, but I don't know that, I don't have a crystal ball to say what's going to be the perfect answer for anyone. This is an answer. So so my final wrap-up is just that I've gone through a bunch of scenarios in my head about what else could be here if not this, and I am just not how do I say this? I feel like the balance of trade-offs here works for me right now for a lot of the same reasons that Connie and Janice have mentioned. So that's where I stand right now. I've gotten over my problem with the size and location and visual impacts of the building.
Okay, well, my turn. I'll kind of start the same way I did 20 months ago, where, I kind of very high bar to get over. As a result, I think I spent more time thinking about this application than any other items ever come before this board. Talking to neighbors, talking to builders, talking to retailers, talking to realtors, and even geriatric social workers, which is something I didn't really know existed. I've walked the I've walked the sidewalk outside the site. We've had 2 site visits. I've been at the Tarrytown site, with you guys. I've driven by the Tarrytown site. Every time I come out of Stop and Shop, I take a look at the Tarrytown site. I came up with a big list of pros and cons, and then cons and pros, and I kind of went back and forth again and again. I think this is all kind of backdropped by the fact that I'm going to be the mayor for a very short time in the history of Irvington. Zoning changes in large developments potentially can change places. I think we're seeing that in Dobbs Ferry more than kind of other places I've seen around here. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a different thing. I don't like it myself. The way Dobbs Ferry is going, and I think frankly Irvington's always been different than Dobbs and Tarrytown. So that's been the background for me. So where do I stand? First, I want to thank Brightview. I think that you have worked very hard to get us to this point, a point where we're considering it. This was a no-brainer no, 6 weeks ago, and you've made a lot of great changes. I thank my board for working so hard, to try to consider this, and considering what is best for Irvington. And I could talk probably for the next half hour, 40 minutes about my list of pros and cons, but to me, at the end of the day, 100,000 square foot building, 3 times the size of the existing building, is just too big for me, and I can't support it. I just feel that it just changes too many things for me right now with the size of it. I think you guys have made some really innovative design changes. I think that there was a lot of great for the design, but at the end, it just, frankly, was just too big for me. So, I don't know if you guys have questions for us, or if anyone else has any comments from our board.
So I'm just going to say one quick thing. Some would probably say that there seem to be 3 supporters of the zoning change, and you know what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go. Yeah.
So I want the board to understand something. We genuinely appreciate the time that those of you have really poured over the details and analyzed this, and really appreciate that. There appear to be 3 people who would be willing to move forward. All we need are 3 votes, but I must tell you, Brightview has never in its history, and there are now, David, 34 open? 34 Brightview residences open. They have never gone to an opening without the support of the chief executive officer of the municipality. So I just want to make sure the board understands and the community understands. Brightview is not interested in breaking that record and creating a new platform moving forward without the support. Obviously, unanimous support is always a great thing, but Mr. Mayor, your view and your position on this is critical to my client, so I'm disappointed with where you shake out. I think on behalf of Brightview, moving past an opportunity that presents itself on this piece of property, that will be for others to decide. So we appreciate your time, and I think that's it for us.
Hey, David, I do have a question. Because I'm a property owner. My name is Jerry Carfiello. I came to you guys 2.5 years ago. So I haven't heard you, Brian, say, what is the right size? I haven't heard you say it, Christine. I gave this community, on behalf of my family, an opportunity. For the record, thank you. We were $400,000 in taxes 12 years ago. We're now 2, and we just went down 45,000 more. This community, at least a third of you, have gotten a pretty big hit. So first of all, thank you very much. I'm not sure why my property is enjoying such of it. I never thought Bernie Sanders talked about the biggest guy with the front in the community. We have the single largest piece of, I love the signs in town. I think the sign's saying no commercial use. I already am using it as commercial. So why is this commercial guy getting the biggest break on its property in the entire county? Tell me why. I don't mind you don't want to do this. What I have not heard, and I've given you the opportunity, is what is it? And at 40 years in this community, at some years 400 grand, I deserve that answer. When you say to me, how are we going to help this community? How would your village think about, I'm not going to change their ratings. I'm not going to change their appraisals. But I do think $500,000 in taxes, where I'm only getting $1.50, and my tax challenge has got me to about $1.10 before I'm done. I do think that has a meaningful answer to this community. But you haven't given me an answer. Christina, you haven't said it on a mark. These guys have been here. I was here a year. I showed you an 85-unit building. There's no secret here to this entire community. These guys have showed you something, 168. Guys, I told you you were wrong. I didn't think we'd get it. 100,000 square feet is what I showed you 2.5 years ago. Why'd you waste my time? Why'd you waste this community's time? Why did you create this? Could have easily told me then. A lot of money, a lot of time. This isn't sitting well. It won't sit well. We will continue to operate as a commercial building. I will be filling it shortly. Thank you.
Thank you all. Good luck to you all.
That's what I said 2.5 years ago. Said like a lot of guys.
Thank you.
Take care, thank you. Nice working with you.
Good luck. Take care, guys.
Brian, can I?
We're going to be quick. Just want to wait for public comment.
Hi, Dennis Flood, Meadowbrook Road. I've sat on that side of the desk for a very long time, and I know the amount of time, the amount of effort, the amount of emotion that all you go through in trying to make a decision like this, okay? I don't know if there's any winners, I don't know if there's any losers. It was a very tough 20 months, no question about it. I respect everybody's opinion here, just letting you know, okay? I believe at the end of the day, the right decision was made by Bikeview to walk, because I just see Irvington in a certain way, okay? And the character, the history, just the way the village appears, if it changed, to have that facade on Broadway, I would think I'd be looking at a front of a movie set that isn't not even real. It certainly wouldn't be Irvington. It would not be when I would turn around and look outside, I see Irvington. I would not be in Irvington, for sure, okay? Just for the record, we did some checking on some of the capacities of the units in and around Irvington, and the unit on 119 has a capacity of 90 occupants, now has 14 out of 90. So it goes to how necessary was this facility. Yes, we made a lot of changes, and yes, this building, this project could fit somewhere else very nicely, but not here, not in Irvington. Thank you, Brian, for being a leader.
Moving on to number 9, there's actually only one appointment tonight, which is for the chair of the Architectural Review Board. There's a second one that was included in there. But I think we've all decided that we want to move ahead with Rocco as the Rick as the architect. So resolved to appoint Rocco Marzullo as the chair of the Architecture Review Board for a term to expire in December 2020. I'll make a motion. Can I have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Are we waiting on this, Brenda? Tabling the approval of the LoSAP award for the ambulance corps. Next is reports of board standing committee officers. Mark?
The two in particular, one of which was, I'm glad that we'll see Whit taking on the chair full-time officially. He's been acting chair for the last few months, and it's probably going to be easier knowing that you're not acting anymore. But the other thing is, we do know that for the ARB, we've had it brought forward by Chris, but the issues, probably one of the key issues on this is to really look at the solar regulations. And I also think the sign code needs that revision study that we talked about, sitting down and trying to move that forward to clear up some of the issues on enforcement and on enforceability, in fact. Then the Tree Commission is meeting tomorrow night, 7:15 at the local history room in the library. And they've got a lot of permits to go through, but they are also looking, they're talking about what to do for Arbor Day. It's a short time frame, so they're not going to have... 29th, right. But usually the village works with the DPW, works with our arborists, carry trees, and at least get one tree planted for the event.
Right.
And that's that for me.
Department, the FACE Committee is hosting Springfest in Matson Park on Saturday, May 14th. Music, local bands, entertainment, games, contests, maybe a zip line, food, beer, wine. So please mark your calendars, May 14th. The Irvington Woods Committee has a great event planned for the community at the O'Hara Nature Center on Saturday, May 7th from 1 to 3:30. It will include live animals, geocaching, hikes, garden demonstrations, and more, including a chance to make a gift for Mother's Day. The Dogs on Leash pilot program is in its 6th week. It's running Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays, Sundays through April 28th. Your dog has to be registered, and just as a special note about that, there will be a meeting for all participants in the Dogs on Leash program this Thursday night at 7 p.m. in the Senior Center. RPAC is meeting on Wednesday, April 20th at 7:30 at the Senior Center. Tonight at the Senior Center. IAS CAB Executive Board is meeting tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. at the Senior Center. The Irvington Woods Committee is holding their meeting on May 19th, 7 p.m. at the O'Hara Nature Center. Just want to give a special thank you to everyone who helped clean up the aqueduct yesterday. Special thanks to Irv Dogs, the Irv Dogs group who organized the event. Also, kayak slips are available to village residents. Slips are $300 for the year, and Mike DiNardo has information about that. Early bird day camp registration continues this Wednesday, April 20th. Maureen DePauli has information on that. Teenscape Summer Travel Camp registration is ongoing. Angela Shaw has info. And that's it.
Okay.
No one has announced that tomorrow is a voting day. If you're either a registered Democrat or a registered Republican, it's a primary day. This is a voting location for some people, including... I have a report from the theater. This Sunday, our final stage door reading series at 3 p.m. with 3 one-act plays, one written by a 16-year-old Irvington resident, Stephanie Oken. The following weekend, Clock Tower Players will be here for their youngest kid troupe presenting Seussical the Musical. And then on Friday the 6th, they will have their very special event, the last of the film festival with short films celebrating female filmmakers from around the world. And that's what's going on at the theater. I would also like to give one little bit of information about something that the library does, if you don't know, and that is you can pick up from the library passes for various museums. I happen to pick up the one to the Intrepid. You can actually go with 6 people and pay nothing, and they put you in a special line, take you in, and you take your grandchildren, your children to the Intrepid for nothing. It's a great thing that the library does.
And I paid for an entire birthday party of 12 little boys.
Oh,
I'm sorry, are you finished?
I'm finished, yes.
Water and Highway Department have been doing their usual combination of long-term, short-term, emergencies, whatever. One thing to be aware of, there has been a schedule published. There will be sequences of hydrant flushing in the various neighborhoods throughout the town. Please take a look at the village, take a look, because it might have some effect on your water pressure for those periods of hours. Also want to mention Greg Nilsson got a shout out in the Hudson Independent for being key to, once again, Irvington being named a tree city. And that is wonderful, and wonderful that he is so key to that effort.
Thank you. We'll go, Village Administrator's Report. Village Clerk Treasurer's Report. Village Attorney's Report. Public comment. Current action items. None, right? Anybody have any? So as Connie said, don't forget to vote tomorrow. If you don't know where to go, you can go to westchestergov.com, I believe it is, figure it out. And our website has a link to it as well. I know we sent an email out today. I will make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Good night. Thank you. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you. How are you? You're welcome.
Talk about it later, Hillary. I don't think it's appropriate to talk about it now.
No. You know, these are ideas.